So I want to talk about literature reviews. A literature review, first of all, is not the same as an evaluation of sources, which we've already looked at. In the evaluation of sources, you're looking at the externals, and you're trying to work out how valuable a source is. Who wrote it? What sort of experience and track record do they have in the field? Who published it? How recently was it published? What sort of editorial controls are it subject to? You're trying to determine how useful it is, or how good or reliable it is. Sometimes, of course, unreliable sources or poor sources may be useful for shedding light on your particular topic. In a literature review, we're looking at the argument within the particular pieces of work and how they relate to one another. So I asked people previously to mind map an article in order to expose the argument that an individual article makes. And in the literature review, what we're looking at is to see how those refer to one another. So this is a page from Chris Hart's book, an illustration from Chris Hart's book on writing literature reviews. It's a wonderful book. This one page is worth the whole book. It's a topic we know very little, if anything, about. It's about DNA development and verification from the 1820s up to the 1960s. And the fact that we know nothing about it is very helpful because we can ignore the content and we can focus on the knowledge map, the knowledge cartography here. Clearly, whoever put this diagram together formed the opinion that initially there were three different strands in this discussion, and they proceeded largely independently up until the mid-1950s, at which point you then see there's a certain amount of cross-referencing and discussion between the three different strands, and they come together. There's a lot of activity, and sometime in the early 1960s they come together, and some kind of agreement is probably reached, which tends to be, sort of gathers together two of the three strands. The third one is a little bit left out in the cold. This is really important for us because it shows how you can map a debate. Anyone who was writing about this topic in the mid-1960s would have needed to have gone back and looked at what this map was evolving, how it had evolved, so they would understand where they were relative to the discussion and could then explain how they were going to carry it on further. So when we look at a particular reading, any reading, in an academic article, usually the first couple of paragraphs, apart from introduction and warm-up, are going to be quite dense in many academic articles with references to previous work. And you really need to pull that apart to identify who the authors are referencing a lot, what they see as the major developments in the field up until the point at which they started writing. And then following on from that, you can then see how they locate their work in the context of the previous discussion. So you really need to pull that apart and see who are they quoting. And this is an example. It's an article about social interaction and enterprise software. And obviously there are some people whom the authors here have quoted quite a lot from, who focus on the user experience. And there are other people that they've quoted who focus on the barriers to success. So there's clearly two camps visible here. Writers who talk about barriers to success for social adaptation of network enterprise software, and those who focus on the importance of the users. So you can immediately see, okay, there's two clusters in this debate that these authors are interested in and have established as the prior art that they want to build on. Of course, there may be a whole cluster of articles on the same topic by other writers that they've chosen to ignore. And determining that requires a bit of investigation. But you almost have to take these quotes out and cut it up and shuffle them round, which is kind of what you do if you mind map an article or multiple articles to see which ones come together and what is the layout of the argument here. As a historian, there are some arguments that I'm very familiar with. I'm familiar with the debate on the origins of World War I. Was it an accident, or was it all Germany's fault? Originally, the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, with the War Guilt Clause, argued that it was Germany's fault. In the 1920s, a number of powers, beginning with Germany published a great deal of diplomatic correspondence in edited form in order to make the argument that it was an accident, that it was because of the system of alliances and secret diplomacy, and that it was no individual power's fault. And then after World War II, the debate swung back again. In 1963, a man called Fritz Fischer published a book in which he argued that, in fact, all of the German diplomatic documents only made sense if the people writing them had a shared view on the world, and that shared worldview was that the political structure in Germany was under social and economic threat and could only be saved by gambling on war sometime after 1912 and certainly before 1916. Fischer's book was not very popular in Germany. Our point here and our interest is in how the debate evolved over time and how different writers reading the same documents came to different conclusions. And of course, much of the argument in the 1920s was very much about politics and diplomacy. Fischer's argument was very much more about the economic and social developments in Germany and in the wider global context. Similarly, on the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima, the classic interpretation was that the atomic bomb was dropped in order to end the war quickly. But an increasing number of writers in the 1960s began to question this, and of course the 1960s is the era of Vietnam. And they argued that the dropping of the bomb was not necessary in order to end World War II, and that it was in fact the first act of the Cold War. That it was done in order to warn the Soviets that the United States possessed that weapon and were willing to use it. And you can see there that how that changes as the generation of 1945 pass from power and a new post-war generation achieves a certain amount of academic status and begins writing about foreign relations. They are writing in the context of their time. So the questions they are asking and the way they are looking at international relations is very much a product of the time they're in. So in a literature review, we seek to discover, in the particular field that we're interested in researching, what are these debates? What are these discussions? There are a number of debates in digital humanities and in the context of the digital. There are debates about how, for example, digital tools have created a rich space for public discourse, or have they simply provided a platform for people to abuse one another, as an article that I tweeted earlier in the week suggested. Have they provided a focus for serious discussion, or do digital tools simply provide a space for the endless recycling of shallow and trivial things? Does it build groups with strong social cohesion? Or does the internet in fact simply create an environment where we are, in Shelley Turkle's words, alone together? Does it facilitate creativity? Does it support political activism? Or are all these things simply noise with no real depth? So that there are debates which are emerging about the nature of the impact of the digital transformation and social media on our society, and there's various different axes on those. And those replicate down to the individual areas of research in the digital that you may be interested in. So there are no right answers to this. In any given debate, there are a multiplicity of perspectives. But what you need to do in developing a literature review is that you need to establish what are the boundaries of that map and what are the big clumps within it. Where are the high points where the debate is most intense, and understand how your particular research interest relates to them and how you're taking those debates and moving them onwards to develop them a little bit. And that's the essence of all knowledge creation, really, is about debate. Somebody offers a thesis, somebody advances an antithesis, there's a synthesis in the end that produces, if not an actual agreement, at least a consensus, which people can operate on and build upon and go forward on. So every little literature review is part of assembling the building blocks of that. And that's why it's an important part of any exercise in pursuing independent building of knowledge, and stepping up and doing a literature review in your field is an important building block in working out how what you're interested in relates to the field in general and how you can carry the two of them forward. So that's literature reviews, and I could come up with a lot more examples, and indeed in the folder there are some examples of literature review articles on a number of topics, on the atomic bomb, Michael Maris on the Holocaust, Trachtenberg's article on the origins of World War I, which are examples of these sort of debates, which you might want to look at one of them maybe in order to see how these things are constructed and change over time.